Good morning. Good to see everyone out this morning. Trying to juggle here and get the stream started and get myself started and be awake. It's been a long night, I'll tell you what. Had to do work last night, so bear with me if you will. Today's lesson is on lesson 6 in the book. And Alan, if y'all have a book? Okay, good deal. So lesson 6 on marriage, and we'll read through the text here. And this is from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 16. Now concerning the things of which you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does, and likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another except with consent for a time, that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer and come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But I say this as a concession, not as a commandment, for I wish that all men, or even as myself, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. But I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Now to the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, a wife is not to depart from her husband. But even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, and a husband is not to divorce his wife. But to the rest, I, not the Lord, say, if any brother has a wife who does not believe, and she is willing to live with him, let him not divorce her. And a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the believing wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but now they are holy. But if the believer departs, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? So, as with the previous chapters in 1 Corinthians, the Corinthians have a lot of issues going on, but so do we this day. I mean, the world around us is in shambles as far as ethics go and morals, and so we, even today, this is all very relatable and applicable to us, and also to those around us that we try to inspire and teach as well. The institution of marriage traces its origins to the 6th day of creation, after God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So, and as we'll continue to read throughout this lesson here, the act of marriage is something instituted by God, as it says, but the actual ceremony of a wedding is not necessarily a religious ceremony, but it can have religious aspects. We need to have God as the center of our marriage especially, but also our other relationships as well, but for sure our marriage. And further down it says, in that moment the first home was created. From then on, Adam and Eve were to devote themselves to each other, and their relationship was to be the model for others to follow. Making this point, Moses concluded, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Like Adam and Eve, those who enter the marriage relationship with God's blessing find themselves in an honorable arrangement. So again, if we are actively seeking God's blessing, if we choose to marry, then we're expected to be in an honorable arrangement, or we'll find ourselves in an honorable arrangement if we center our relationships around God. It says, whereas God did not view man's situation as ideal prior to the creation of woman, afterward he viewed all of his creation as, and indeed it was very good. We may rightly conclude that the institution of marriage exists because of God and with his blessing. Consequently, marriage must be viewed as a gift from God and to be treasured and protected. Jesus emphasized this fact when he was questioned about the permanence of marriage. And we'll get to that in just a second. But too many times the world sees marriage as unnecessary and just a piece of paper in a lot of people's eyes. But it's much more than that, especially if we understand what God's plan is. But we also see that, not everyone has to be married. Some people are better suited to not be married. And some people are better suited to be married. But we'll get into that part of it as well. And then further down, talking about what Jesus' comments were on it. Have you not read that he who made them in the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. God intends for marriages to last. So, and we'll get into the one flesh in the next section. But when individuals honor God's plan for marriage by rendering the respect and love due to their spouse, the potential of marriage can be realized. In such marriages, selfishness is excluded. The husband loves his wife in a way that mirrors the love Christ has for the church. And the wife proves by her attitude and actions that her worth is far above rubies. So, again, it's not just a one-sided relationship. It's not just all on the man, or it's not all on the wife. But there is, expectations from both sides to respect each other and to love each other and to not be selfish in their actions and during the actual marriage itself. So let's look at the what it calls the roles here. The creation of Eve marked the beginning of marriages and the home. Adam and Eve became partners. The two became one flesh. Although this certainly has reference to their sexual union, it also conveys an emotional closeness enjoyed by the married couple. If anything, Eve's creation from Adam's rib points to this closeness. Now, something that I've always found humorous with Cecily, ever since we've been married, if we ever have a meal or something like that, and we'll share off each other's plates sometimes, and sometimes I won't agree to her taking a bite or whatever, and she'll say, well, we are one. So I can't argue with it, but I might not necessarily want to share all the items that I have, or specifically the Dr. Pepper that I think is mine. But so even outside of the jokiness of it, it's true. When you're married to your spouse, at that point you are one in the relationship. It's not a one-sided or lopsided situation. It's a unified front, so to speak. And going back to the text here, it says, therefore Adam said about Eve, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. From that point onward, he cared for her as he did for himself and treated her accordingly. So again, we have various examples of how the husband should treat his wife and the wife should treat her husband. And it's all in a selfless manner. It's I want better for her than I want for myself, or as good for her as I want for myself. And sometimes it takes sacrifice on one or both parties to make sure that the other is taken care of in that respect. Husbands and wives who follow Adam's example would cherish one another, embrace and rejoice in the relationship that they share. And then further down it says, responding to questions about appropriate sexual behavior. So again, this section of 1 Corinthians is chock full of issues that the Corinthians had with morals overall. And it's not a situation that's different from today, so to speak, because there are moral issues all around us. The sanctity of marriage has been destroyed more or less, or has been weakened more or less from the popular culture around us. And it says, now concerning the things of which you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman, nevertheless because of sexual immorality. Let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Although the sexual relationship is not the only unique bond shared between husband and wife, its importance should not be minimized. Husbands and wives enjoy this gift from God within the confines of their marriage. Those who protect and treasure the gift are wise. This is why the author of Hebrews wrote, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. And, I had a discussion with Jim earlier because, sexual relationships is not something that's easy to talk about in mixed company. But it's something that we're told to, we're given examples for and guidance for in the Scripture itself. But how do husbands and wives develop a healthy sexual relationship in the marriage? And Paul offered 3 important suggestions. And we'll hit these points real quick. First, each spouse must do what he or she can to meet the needs of the other. Second, each spouse should feel a sense of ownership over the other. And then third, husbands and wives should recognize the important role of a healthy sexual relationship plays in helping them avoid temptation. So again, we're given numerous or 3 examples here of how we can help each other the husband and wife can help each other in their relationship. So, it's not a foregone conclusion that just because you're a Christian and you're married that relationship is going to be great. The temptations around the world are always there, regardless of if your salvation is in place or not. So we have to work together as spouses and be able to help each other to be in a better situation to avoid the temptations that are around us. So let's look at the alternative now. Instead of only having the option of being married and not, let's look at another option here. Okay, sorry. So Paul's admonition to those who are married does not mean that marriage is a requirement of the Christian. It is not. Individuals may choose to marry, but they may also choose to remain unmarried. Concerning this alternative, Paul wrote, "For I wish that all men were even as I myself, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that." So again, marriage is a great and wonderful thing and a blessing from God, but at the same time, nothing says that you have to be married. And sometimes it's better for individuals to not be married because of different circumstances. And we'll get into that a little bit as well. But it says, because he was unmarried, Paul was able to devote his full attention to the Lord's work. So, and that's not to say that a married couple can't be great workers for the Lord as well. But it may be better for an individual not to be married, so they can be a more useful individual in the Lord's kingdom. Paul was unmarried and was a faithful worker for God. So, you don't have to be married to be a faithful worker for God or to be found faithful to God. Regardless of our marital status, we can also be faithful. So, like I said, it's not linked to the one or the other. We don't have to be married to be found faithful, and we don't have to be single to be found faithful. We can be faithful regardless of our marriage situation. And I think it's, sometimes people might look at unmarried individuals differently because they're unmarried, and they're not, how can he be pleasing to God if he's not actively looking to start a family and so on and so forth. But Paul was not married, and he was found faithful to God and did great work for God. And as we can as well, we can do many good things in the name of the Lord, and regardless of our marital status. So even outside of the options of being single or being married, we have our place in God's kingdom, and there's always work to do regardless of that status. So let's look at for those that do choose to get married, the respect for vows. Having noted that marriage is a choice rather than an obligation, Paul turns his attention to individuals who are married and indicated that the relationship they choose to enter is supposed to last for life. So if you do choose to get married, just know that despite all the other aspects of our lives nowadays that come with a trial period, marriage does not come with a trial period. Marriage is something that once you decide to do it, it should be your goal, and something that you strive to do is be in it for the long haul. Now, things happen outside of our own control sometimes, but it's not something that we should go into with, if I don't like her, I can just find somebody else. But once you get married, it's a lifetime commitment. And with that being said, I found an article by Wayne Jackson about the foolish reasons for getting married. And it talks about there are a number of good reasons in harmony with God's design for desiring to be part of a marriage relationship. One may meet a winsome Christian who has attractive spiritual and personal qualities that appear to be ideal for a lifelong marital union. Certainly, children of God who opt for marriage ought to seek companions who are compatible with them and with the Lord, someone who is willing to able to enhance their journey toward heaven. It should be recognized, however, that marriage is an option and not an obligation. There are some who choose not to marry. They seem perfectly happy and well adjusted as single people. Others who desire to marry simply have not discovered a suitable prospective mate, and with patience they choose to wait. Perhaps they are familiar with the old adage, marry in haste, repent in leisure. It is entirely possible, however, for men and women, young or old, to feel pressure to marry. Hence, they may enter the sacred union rather impulsively without due consideration for their eternal interest. And thus, for a variety of wrong reasons, such rash judgment can prove disastrous. Marriage is an until death do us part commitment. It ought to be approached from a joyous yet cautiously solemn vantage point. Marriage should be embraced for wise reasons, not foolish ones. So let's look at a few of the poor reasons that people will choose to marry. Some will marry for financial security. And when I was reading this article and going over the lesson, it popped in my head something that my late aunt used to say. If she would ever, and it wasn't really an argument, but her and her husband, my uncle, would disagree on something. And she'll say, well, I married for love the first time, I'm married for money the next time. She was joking, of course, but it was always something that they picked at each other about. But, they, up until their deaths, they were a great couple and enjoyed their time together. But it is unfortunate that some people do marry for money. They see bigger things in lives and in their life than as a financial gain instead of spiritual gain, so they go for the financial part of it. And they, especially the younger crowd, they see the things that people of more mature age have that, well, I want that right now. I don't want to have to wait until I'm older to have those things, so I'm going to marry for money. And, marry for the wrong reasons, then you're going to suffer the consequences. But it says here, closer to home are the situations, for example, where a daughter is reared by a shiftless, unproviding father determined to have the better life. She marries the first young man who is able to offer her economic stability. Such a barter is a sorry basis for a marriage, and she may well learn that the heartbreaking lessons that a happy home is more than dollars and cents. It says, and the next option here is, example here is bored and looking for adventure. And I would kind of probably lump that in the same category as the marrying for money, because if you're looking for adventure, you're not going for a broke person. I'm just putting it bluntly. So there are those that enter into the marriage to escape a miserable and boring domestic situation. So again, if you're in a situation where you're stuck in a desolate region and somebody comes along and you think, well, if I marry them, I can get out. So those situations are prevalent as well. And then there's the I do for spite. Some marriages are out of revenge. So, you date somebody for a while, break up, and they get married after they find somebody, and they say, well, I'm going to make them jealous and get married too. They probably don't care. But people do it all the time. It's not a game. Marriage relationships can have eternal consequences. And then there's the all my friends are getting married and I don't want to be left out. Sadly, this is something that happens as well. Snap decisions can generate a lifetime of bitter experiences. Marriage is not an arrangement with which to trifle. And then there's probably the most common of them is the marriage should not be entered to cover up a mistake. And in this age of lust and promiscuity, what could a couple do when they discover that a child has been conceived out of wedlock? Sometimes we must get married is the quick fix formula. And Brother Wayne Jackson suggests that maybe it's not the individual that is the father of your child that is the person that you should marry, but sometimes it is. But regardless, you want to make sure that you're living the life that you should be living, and that situation will not come about. And then getting a trophy. Marriage on the basis of mere physical attraction is a foolish mistake, because what happens as we get older? We lose our looks. And it happens to the best of us. So it's sad, but it's true, especially it seems like more so in the age of social media, that a lot of these things happen. People are jealous of what other people have, and they marry for money, or they marry somebody that's beautiful only on the outside, and numerous other examples of that nature. And then the last one, it says marrying for desperation. Finally, it hardly needs saying, but it is the epitome of folly to marry out of desperation. It is better to be single for life than to live in a house with a hateful mate. But some are so afraid that their advanced stage of life, if they don't marry soon, the bliss may never come. The thought of missing out is too horrible for them to contemplate, and so marry they must. And he goes on to say, he says, I've known several cases where the folks married out of panic, only to have their relationship crumble within weeks. So again, there are numerous reasons to get married, but there are also a number of reasons that people marry foolishly. And going back to our text here, it says the rule of marriage for life holds not only for those who marry Christians, which is ideal, but also for those who marry non-Christians. A brother or sister is married to an unbeliever, he or she should not seek divorce for that reason. It is possible that Christians can convert a non-Christian spouse to Christ through godly conduct. Regardless, marriage to an unbeliever does not make that marriage illegitimate. So, and there are numerous examples that we know of from our personal lives where one was a believer and the other one was not, and they got converted. But sadly, we know the opposite as well, where the non-believer just didn't give, and it caused the believer or the Christian to fall away and to lose their zeal for God. So we have to be careful, and we have to be mindful of the mates that we choose for ourselves. So it is something that we have to think about. But again, it's not something that we can look at the Scripture and say, well, we can't marry a non-believer, because that's just not something the Scripture says. But there are risks involved in any relationship, but especially in that one, because it could cause us to fall away if we're not strong enough and not diligent enough in our own beliefs. So let's look at some of the applications here on the page 57. It says, given the current attacks upon the institution of marriage, Christians should remind themselves of the foundational principles discussed throughout this lesson. God created marriage for humanity's benefit. This does not mean that everyone must marry. It does, however, indicate that those who marry are entering a relationship existing because of divine appointment. Consequently, one must not act as if marriage is unimportant or assume it can be easily discarded. Again, too often the world as a whole has denigrated the importance of marriage in general, and taken away the meaning of the part of the vows where we say until death do us part, because too many people are conditioned to just say, well, if it don't work out, you can always find another one. It's not a car. You have to go until either one of you is no longer living. It's something that takes work. Just because we marry a Christian does not mean it's going to be easy. And it, doesn't mean it's going to be hard either, but there's work in every relationship, and especially in the marriage relationship. Whether it be adjusting to no longer living by yourself and, living by your own rules and whatever else, to just, take into account that what you do also impacts your spouse. So there's a lot to consider, and for some individuals, maybe their life situation doesn't condone themselves to being married. Maybe they travel a lot, or maybe they're just can't focus enough on themselves, much less a spouse, and there are other more legitimate reasons than that. But some people are heartbroken and have to deal with that, and some people just can't find someone that's compatible with them, which is fine as well. There's no wrong in that, so long as you're living the way God would want you to live. God intends for marriage to last until death, and the only exception for this rule is in case of fornication. Additionally, we must be reminded that the marriage God instituted is designed for one man to marry one woman. One may not question this fact based on culture, for it was established at the beginning and is anchored to the creation. So regardless of what the world says, God has given us guidelines that we've got to follow. One man and one woman, and it's until death do us part. Save for the case of fornication, where reconciliation cannot be made, of course. So let's look at the second application there. Paul's instructions regarding sexual intimacy in marriage should not be ignored. The one flesh relationship is a gift from God to husband and wife. Those who work to protect this relationship do well. Here are the words of the Shulamite in the Song of Solomon are relevant. She said to her beloved, "Set me as a seal upon your heart and seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame." Husbands and wives would do well to acknowledge this truth and protect your marriage. So let's look at some of the discussion questions here. How can Paul's discussion in the sexual relationship in marriage be used to benefit Christians today? If we're truly seeking to be selfish in our marriage, then it's not going to completely do away with the temptations outside the marriage, but it's going to go a long way to ensure that our marriage relationship is strong and the sexual aspect of it. So, again, there's always areas that we can improve on, and the sexual aspect is one of them. But the emotional aspect, the being able to provide not only financially but emotionally as well. There's various aspects of that, but the sexual relationship in a marriage can be used to benefit the overall strength of the marriage, just in the aspect of curbing the temptations that may present itself and the opportunities that may arise. So what can we learn about the marriage relationship from this passage? Not to take it lightly. It's something that we need to work at and seek the guidance of the Bible in. And also, just the general nature of which we should approach it from our own standpoint. A selfless nature, not being selfish and not seeking our own benefit from that relationship, but seeking the benefit of our spouse. Sure.
First of all, when you're talking about here verses 1 and 2 here, again, we see that every man is to have his own wife, every woman is to have her own husband. We see that marriage is a husband and a wife.
Right.
As our society sees marriage as homosexual marriage, we need to understand that marriage is selfless. As you mentioned, a lot of divorces happen because people are selfish.
Yeah.
Self-seeking, versus here we see Paul say that a marriage really should be one in which we are giving, we're selfless, we're working with one another. I'm sure that can be sometimes we have arguments and fusses and fights and things, but a marriage takes work. And so Paul understands this, but he also understands that we have an enemy that's looking to destroy us too, and destroy our marriage and our homes. And so he gives a word of advice on the side. That very, very important, that fasting is very important, and that we need there to be sex and joy together in marriage so that we don't lack that self-control, we don't lose that love for one another, and we have a focus and miss the temptation. So those are just a few things here he gives there in the first 5 verses.
Right. And bringing up the fasting, it's very few times that you'll see that in the context of someone strengthening themselves, because we're not commanded to fast at any point during our calendar year or whatever. We're not told on for this date you got to fast for so many days, but we can see that it is a useful tool to help us focus ourselves. And like you said, the world around us has perverted the idea of marriage to the point where it's no longer one man and one woman. They try to pervert it to where it's one of anything and one of anything. And even more so, they try to pervert it to where it's multiple of anythings, because there are groups of people out there that think there are polygamous relationships that are acceptable. But the way God intended it, it was one man and one woman, and it was for life. And it was something that, admittedly has to be worked on. It's not just going to happen and you're going to be hunky-dory all the way through, because even the strongest marriages have ups and downs, whether it be the sexual aspect, the financial, the emotional, the physical. I mean, whatever the case is, they're going to have issues where they got to work through it. So again, there's numerous areas where the world has perverted the idea of marriage, if not tried to destroy it altogether. because a lot of people don't see marriage as important, even, in relationship to God, because they think, well, marriage is an outdated concept, and God just wants me to be happy, so, it's just a piece of paper. Well, in the government's eyes, it is a piece of paper, but the actual process of becoming married is something that, again, is not a religious ceremony, so to speak, but it is a sanctioned action by God. And we can be married in the sight of God and not have any documentation with any kind of governmental entity, and still be held to the same requirements that God would have us have. So, number 3 there says, what does this passage teach us about those who choose to remain unmarried? And under what circumstances would this choice be preferable? So again, going back to the section here, Paul, made mention that he was himself unmarried. He says, "But I say unto the unmarried and unto the widows, it is good for them to remain even as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry." So again, it's not that you have to get married and you're bad if you don't get married. It's if your situation allows it, and you're, going into it understanding that it's a commitment and it's not just something that happens on a whim, and if it don't work out, it don't work out kind of thing. Because some people, like I said, are not built for marriage, and then some people choose not to be married because, they're not in the right place in their life to do it, and they don't want to commit to it because, they know they'll fail at it, or they'll think they'll fail at it, or whatever. And that's not to say anything bad about those individuals, because Paul was one of those individuals where he did not get married because he thought that he was doing bigger work for God. But again, yes, ma'am. No, go ahead. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you said, back then especially, because there was no opportunity outside of the home that a woman could pursue. Yeah. But there were very few opportunities. But at that time, it was, for a lot of the world, it was an arranged process. You were getting married because of some deal that was brokered between the parents of the two involved. The fathers, yeah, exactly. The fathers. The mothers had no say in it, more or less. But again, thankfully that's not the case anymore. At least not for the vast majority of the world. It's not something that's a brokered situation. There might be some. Cecily follows the royal family. That's probably the last high-profile arrangements that were made for marriages, and it's not really an arrangement, but they only marry at a certain class, so to speak. They would never marry the commoner. There's always some lineage just involved, and so be it. But it's not the case now where, if you're dating someone, your parents don't get together and compare, oh, they're not blue bloods like we are, so you can't associate with them. And now it's just more of a, so long as, especially if they're a Christian family, so long as you're both of the mindset that this is not a temporary thing, and you're doing it for the right reasons, then yeah, then the vast majority of times the parents don't have anything to say about it. In very rare situations where the families know each other, there might be some bad blood between them or whatever, and the Hatfields and McCoys type situation, you know, where there's feuding going on. But for the vast majority of the time, it's more of a situation where the two involved in the actual marriage process are the ones making the choice of whether or not they're actually going to be married. Right.
And the average marriage, I believe, is in the United States, that's about 8 years at max. So, you know, marriage is a huge decision, but more importantly, it's very important that we know who we're marrying and what person we're being married, and understand all the aspects of it, because so many people jump into it
Right.
and then make mistakes, and then those mistakes obviously are very painful.
Yeah, and it's not really hit on very hard in this lesson particularly, but you know, the outcome of your marriage can greatly affect the outcome of your soul. Because if you're marrying someone that's a Christian, then you're going to have a better chance to feed off each other as far as, you know, strengthening your relationship with not only each other but also with God. But also, you know, the reverse is true. If maybe you're in a situation where you would be better suited with your salvation to not be married, because you know, that I can't explain it because I'm married, but go ahead.
One more point, because Genesis 6:1, where the sons of God took the daughters of men, and they married them, and we know what happened. We were in Genesis 6, when the people of God chose to marry those that obviously that were not in harmony with God or didn't pursue the pathway of God. It ended up that the whole world ended up in a flood. And so,
Right.
again, those examples in the Old Testament are there for us to learn from and recognize those mistakes and things that people made getting away from God's divine pattern of one man, one woman for life, and the discussion that you mentioned being exploitation. So, again, we can see so many things, patterns there that make a big difference for us if we would only just do what God said and do what He said.
Absolutely. We're given numerous examples that work out for the benefit and numerous examples that work out for the detriment of marrying inside and outside of, you know, of our circle and of the kingdom, so to speak. So we have various examples of it, but it's on us to actually read it, understand it, and apply it to our lives, and actually do the hard work of making a relationship work even before we get married. But again, that's if we choose to marry to start with. So that's all the time we have. I'm not sure who has next week. I think it might be David Hedges, but I might be wrong. So thank you for your attendance, and we'll have our worship service starting in a little bit.